Sophia, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks very much, Lewis. Thanks for the invitation. I look forward to the discussion.
Yeah, so one thing I just want to kick off from this conversation is, if you have any, who are some of your favourite coaches?
Wow. Difficult question, only for the point of view that I don't want to disappoint anybody that I have met.
Yeah,
there's so many.
Anyone listening to that don't take offence to this. There can be, there's no favouritism, but there are. I guess if I was to reframe it, then what would be some of your favourite characteristics of the coaches that you've met?
Some of them, the most positive characteristics, I would say, and maybe I'm affected a little bit, and maybe I'm biased as well because of the work that I do. But I do appreciate characteristics on a coach that highlight that they have a genuine interest in each one athlete, performer, under their wings. That's what I look out to see whether they have established that sort of connection, interest that is authentic, that is pure, and if they have that, then I'm confident they will do a good job, or they are doing a good job in their job. So that's what I'm looking. This is the characteristic, the main one that I look anyway.
Do you have you ever watched Ted Lasso?
People have mentioned to me, but I haven't. No.
Oh God, well, you've got to get onto it, Sophia. You've got. So you 100% need to be watching that, because I think I've actually dedicated an entire episode to some of the takeaways from that whole series, and right. I think the reason, I've said this before on the podcast, and the reason why I love Ted Lasso as a show so much, especially the first and second series, is it actually gives people, whether it's purposefully done or not, I don't know, that actually gives people a guide of how to deal with some of the issues, interpersonal issues that we face, as not only whether it's in sport, but actually just in life, the relationships we deal with outside of sport. And it's people apologizing to each other, and you actually get to see how an interaction of real purposeful apology may happen, or people owning their mistakes, or really caring for each other, what it actually looks like. And it's such a wholesome show. It's comical, wow. It's wholesome. It's got these real deeper meanings to it around mental health and connecting with each other. But I think one of the brilliant things that comes out of it is Ted Lasso, the head coach, Ted Lasso, he is constantly interested. And there's the famous quote that in one of the scenes of quoting Walt Whitman, "Be curious, not judgmental." He's so curious about the coaches. He's so about the individuals. He's so curious about everyone, and rather than judging and having a hierarchy in that system, it's about being interested rather than interesting.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, you haven't sold better this program to me, so yeah. I'm on it.
Yeah,
I'm on it straight after this.
I can't believe you haven't watched it yet. I can't believe you haven't done it. So
yeah, I can't believe I haven't watched it. Yes, I should get on with it. Yes, yeah.
Right, we'll set that up. So, where did your passion come from? Coach-athlete relationship and your research within that. Where did it ignite for you?
Great question. Yes, because we all have these little triggers, don't we, as researchers, that trigger our curiosity. So it started when, potentially, I think, when I was an athlete myself, and I come from Greece. I was born and brought up in Athens, from a very, very family, sporting orientated family. And when I got involved in sport, I used to run in athletics, 400 meters, hurdles. In the period I was involved, in my teenage years, from about 12 to about 20, I had three coaches, I will say three good coaches in that period. But the middle coach was the coach that really made a difference to me, and reflecting back, but also when I was an athlete myself, I think I was aware of the impact this coach has had on me personally. And so that second coach showed exactly the interest and was very caring and understanding. He was the only coach that asked me, what do I want out from sport? What are my goals and aspirations? He was very engaging and truly very interested in me and to make me a better athlete, because that's what I wanted. I really, really did. And it was the period with him, and we were only together for 2 years, where I did, fantastically well in sport. I broke records. I was a national school champion, a club champion, in Greece. So it is the one that I will forever very fondly remember. And unfortunately, he has passed away rather. And yes, that's how I think I developed an interest in the topic that we are talking today, which is the coach-athlete relationship. But also, to be perfectly honest, when I started as a researcher doing my PhD in this particular area, I did realize, Luis, and that was a long time ago, I must admit, almost 25 years ago, there was nothing around coach-athlete relationship. The word or the term coach-athlete relationship was very rarely mentioned. And therefore, that kind of justified my interest, my scientific interest, that there was a gap that needed to be understood a little bit better to close and fill. So there we are. So it was an interest that started when I was an athlete myself, and also scientifically I thought it was justified to pursue that line of inquiry.
It's actually beautifully wholesome that's the way in which it started, because it clearly started from positive impacts that coaches had on you. Quite often, I think, having spoken to academics that have dived into research areas that potentially did have gaps in the academic space, that it was born out of a negative influence that they had. And I would even argue some of my research that I want to go into is based out of negative influences that I experienced. And it's sort of that wanting to right the wrongs that you felt you've had before, but hearing you say, well, actually I've had a path that was a positive one for me, and one that had a great influence, and I want to explore why that was. And I've heard you say before about even sort of coming out of the frameworks and the models that you've found in your research, is that it's not about being a bad coach, that it's actually just not good. And and I've heard you say that before, which is really interesting. It's that we can sometimes frame coaches as bad, so that's a bad coach. And I thought the way that you said that previously was that actually, well, what we found is that there's just not good, and there is a good, and there's just not good as well.
Yeah. I don't know whether that is an attitudinal characteristic of mine to pick up things in that way. It may be, but I think there is always room for improvement, and that's how I see it. So we all start from a certain point, which may be X. How do we get to a point where it is a much better point, I suppose? So maybe that is how I see it. We've got to start from somewhere. There is always room for improvement, and we just need to be aware where we stand, where we are, so that we can make those. We can progress and advance in ways that can be very positive for ourselves and for others.
Yeah. So to set a bit of a foundation for people on the podcast for this episode, I'd love for you just to explain the 3C+1 model, what you found, and yeah, there's no better person to have describe it, because I don't want to butcher anything alongside it. So explain to people what you found and what the characteristics are. Okay.
Thanks for the opportunity to describe it. It's very simple, the model that we have created. So let's get started. So it's so when we started that research, we realized, as I mentioned earlier, that there was nothing much around the coach-athlete relationship as a concept, as a phenomenon. And therefore, one of the first things that I set out to do as a PhD student many years ago was to try to pinpoint this rather elusive phenomenon. The reason that I wanted to have a very clear conceptualization, description of the phenomenon was that if we can capture it, if we can measure it, then we can improve it. So the conceptualization goes something like this. We defined the coach-athlete relationship as a situation, as a social situation that occurs between the coach and the athlete. And we felt that it was important to capture coaches and athletes' interpersonal feelings, thoughts, and behaviors. And we knew that because we are capturing a relationship, the interdependence of these thoughts, feelings, and behaviors were very important to highlight. So starting really from almost zero, although we did look at research that has taken place outside sport for inspiration. We interviewed hundreds of coaches and athletes. We measured quantitatively through surveys thousands of coaches and athletes, and we have come up with this model that we know, as you mentioned, 3+1 Cs. And the 3+1 C stands for 4 constructs that describe and capture the quality of the relationship: closeness, commitment, complementarity, and co-orientation. So I will explain very briefly, if that's all right with you, each one of these concepts, and then you can ask me questions and we can elaborate a little bit more about what these constructs capture. So closeness reflects both a coach and an athlete's affective bond. It captures their interpersonal feelings and the core feelings that we want to see in a good quality relationship from a closeness point of view include coaches and athletes' trust, respect, appreciation, and liking one another. So if we have a coach and athlete relationship, when they both report that they have high levels of trust, respect, appreciation, and liking for one another, then we have high levels of closeness. If these individuals report low levels of trust, respect, appreciation, and liking, then the closeness is low. And of course, we have a scenario where the coach and the athlete's perceptions can be divergent. They may not overlap as such. And again, that will highlight that there is a low level of closeness there, and we would probably want to investigate a little bit better, a little bit more why. So that is closeness in a nutshell, and closeness we feel very, very important. When I speak to coaches and athletes for that matter, and I ask them what does a good quality relationship look like, the first things that they will say is respect, trust, and then appreciation may come, may follow, and a few might mention liking, but liking, it is important as well to keep in mind. Commitment now. Commitment reflects a coach's and athlete's intention to maintain a close-knit bond over time. And of course, we both appreciate, and I'm sure your listeners will appreciate the fact that in order to progress and advance and improve skills, improve performance, you need time. And therefore, the commitment between a coach and an athlete is hugely important, especially during times of hardship or when things don't go quite well. So that when there is burnout, when there is injury, when there is personal issues in the lives of these people, commitment is the glue that keeps them together. Very, very important. And also commitment is important when there is a little bit of conflict, maybe disagreements, misunderstandings, incompatibility. The higher the level of commitment to one another, the more the likelihood to resolve their misunderstandings, their misalignment, perhaps in their views. So from commitment, we move to complementarity. Now, complementarity captures coaches and athletes' interpersonal behaviors, what they do when they are in the presence of one another. And complementarity, I would probably say, is synonymous to collaboration or cooperation. So we will expect both the coach and the athlete, when they are in the presence of one another, to be receptive, to be responsive, to be adapting a friendly stance to one another, as opposed to being hostile or cold or distant, and to be at ease or relaxed in each other's presence. So these are important characteristics that I will look out when I observe a coach and athlete in action. Do they demonstrate these behaviors, for example? And I will expect both the coach and the athlete to show this through their behaviors, through their interactions. But also complementarity captures the role. Complementarity captures the roles that the unique roles that the coach and the athlete assume in this particular relationship. So the coach is a person that we expect to be able to lead, to direct, to instruct, to support, to provide feedback. And on the other hand, the athlete, we expect, and they expect themselves, to be able to execute instructions, to be able to filter information, advice in and out as they see fit, and so on and so forth. And that takes us now to the last C, which is co-orientation. And co-orientation, very simple, I will say, is about the common ground that the specific coach and athlete dyad have established over the course of them being together. So in a young relationship, in a relationship where the coach and the athlete, for example, have just come together, it's a very new, their common ground, their mutual understanding about perhaps their goals, their styles, their preferences, their fears, their goals are not well established yet. They're in the process of getting to know each other and understanding. So their common ground may be quite limited versus a coach and an athlete who have been in a relationship for quite a while, and therefore their common ground is larger. So they know and understand one another really, really well. And I remember, and I often use this anecdote. Well, it's not an anecdote. I think Bob Bowman, the coach of Michael Phelps, said in one of his interviews, I don't remember whether I heard it or read it, he said that I know how Michael will execute a training session by just seeing him entering the pool. It is, this kind of highlights and reflects the level of understanding that coach has relative to that athlete, how well they know one another to kind of make those judgments, those evaluations. And as a result, Bob Bowman say, I can use that information to adjust the training accordingly. But also, it kind of initiates a conversation perhaps with the athlete. If you see an athlete not being 100%, then, curiosity, as you said, Louise, kicks in. How are you today? Why am I seeing you being a little bit low or a little bit not yourself? So, and from there, we can develop further conversation and understanding about the state of the athlete's mind at that given time. So I think that more or less, captures the 4 C's. But I'll be happy to ask to answer any questions you may have.
There's so much to unpack there, and I mean, I'm going to go back to closeness, and it's something you mentioned about liking, and closeness being this quite literally the feeling of closeness to your coach. And you mentioned things like respect, the values that you might have, and I was thinking about this, which was, so often you do hear people say you don't have to like someone to get along with them. And I think if I'm thinking about coaches that I've worked with, the ones that I felt the closest with, or the same way I would have a coach that I had 2 coaches, one that I felt close with, one that I didn't feel close with. Now, both of those coaches, I could trust them, I could respect them, I could feel they're like ultimately good at what they do. However, the one I feel closest to is just genuinely the one I like, the one that I have got on with and have mutual understanding with, or a bit of fun, humour, and they lighten up, and it is that closeness, is that liking of them. I don't think that is to be underrated. I think it's so important that we actually like the people that we work with.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I must admit, I do get a little bit of pushback from coaches, particularly, not so much from athletes when I refer to this particular relational property that holds us together. Yes, coaches sometimes do find it difficult to kind of see that liking our athletes is important. And the way I explain it is that if you don't like an athlete, if we take it, the other way around, if you don't like the athlete, then inadvertently you close off certain opportunities, even unconsciously or subconsciously. It is very likely that you will give more of your time and more of your resources as a coach to an athlete that you truly like, as opposed to someone that you don't like or you like not as much as another. So liking can create a little bit of biases in terms of resources and opportunities. And I want to open up coaches to see that it may be unintentionally they hold back from providing similar opportunities, similar resources to the athletes that perhaps they don't like. So we need to open up their minds. I would love to be able to kind of ask all coaches to think a little bit about it and how it does affect you. And perhaps there will be, and a lot of your listeners, I'm pretty sure, there will be coaches there in the audience who will be thinking, yeah, there are athletes in my squad, if I am to be truly honest, that I don't particularly like for whatever reason. Now,
those biases are very important to highlight, because I've seen it play out, I've seen it happen, and it can change outlooks very fast. It can change relationships quite quickly, because I think resentment is a virus of an emotion that can spread very quickly within a human being, I think. And something like having a bias within an athlete relationship group is very importantly highlighted.
It is. And we need to be more conscious about these biases. And that's why I will invite coaches kind of consider, where they stand with their athletes, particularly looking at liking, because that is perhaps more contested than the other relational properties within closeness. And perhaps ask themselves, why perhaps I dislike or not like that athlete. And I would probably go back and say, potentially because you don't know that athlete that well. And it may be that something that athlete has done, personality-wise or attitudinal-wise or otherwise, that has disconnected you. And I will invite those coaches to try to connect and find out a little bit more about their athletes and find, and enlarge their common ground and the level of similarity that they have. And I think by doing that process, they will probably increase their liking for their athlete. And if the feelings are mutual, I think that by approaching the athlete in that way, then the athlete will probably come around and appreciate that, hang on a minute, I like that coach right now. He's showing a little bit of interest. He's spending a little bit of time with me. That says something.
Did your research look at both team and individuals? Did you bring them together? Did you put them all in as one? Did you separate them, do different research on what you might find differently or similar in whether it was an individual athlete-coach relationship or a team athlete-coach relationship?
Yeah, that is a good question. And I just felt, right from the start that we must not differentiate between team and individual sports when we come to consider this concept that we call coach-athlete relationship. I felt very strongly that relationship between coaches and athletes is important regardless of the sport and the sport type, even performance level. And therefore, all the research we have done it looking at both individual and team sports without really differentiating. However, we have done some research because we try to kind of compare and contrast the level of relationship quality that maybe athletes perceive in team versus individual sports. And that research actually was carried out several years ago, maybe even 10 years ago. And what we found was that athletes in individual sports, as you will expect, perceive their relationship with their coaches much higher. So a much better quality relationship than athletes who operated in team sports. And of course, you may say, so, well, that is natural and expected. And actually, we did expect it a little bit. But what was the key in that research? What we found as well was that athletes in individual sports had high quality relationships with their coaches, and that relationship quality led them to be much more satisfied with performance and training and instruction, whereas athletes in individual sports, having a little lower quality relationship, they didn't feel as satisfied with their performance, their training, and so on. So what we concluded was that maybe coaches of team sports can learn something from coaches of individual sports and really pay attention on how they connect, relate, and interact with their athletes in team sports.
Makes sense, because I came from a team sport and I've worked with athletes in individual sports, and quite interestingly, there is, in a team sport environment, while say, and we'll for the sake of it talk about head coach being the main in a team sport, because in a team sport, obviously there's multiple different coaches that are going on. You can have in, say, rugby, you can have a forwards coach, a backs coach, a kicking coach, and then the head coach and assistant coaches and all sorts. And the same in football, for example. But let's say, for example, it's just the head coach. You would expect that in team sports because you rely, I think, for your everyday life and training and experience that you're having as an athlete in a team, you don't necessarily heavily rely on that coach all the time. You actually rely on your teammates. You rely on the people around you. You rely on the sort of the accessory areas around that experience. Whereas every athlete that I've spoken to that is a track and field athlete, is a swimmer, they really, that relationship with the head coach is it's so much more concentrated, and because it's sometimes they're traveling with them, they're maybe, if they are in technically a team, it's one of maybe 5 athletes in that team, but pretty much the contact time throughout training competitions is solely with that coach. So it does make sense. It does really make sense. If you were to say what some of those areas, you mentioned it, what team-based coaches could learn off individual coaches, what would you say you've seen that you would encourage them to take on, if there was a certain, I don't know, personality trait or strategy that they potentially have that you've seen work well in individuals that could work well in teams?
Before I respond, and perhaps I need a little bit more clarification about the question, I would also like to say a little bit about what I mentioned earlier, that the relationship between the coach and the athlete is paramount regardless of whether the sport is a team or individual sport. And there are so many high-profile team sports where the coaches talk about the significance, the how instrumental the relationship is for performance and well-being of their athletes. And I will refer to you asked me earlier about the coaches that I look up to, or coaches that I quite like. I follow a little bit of football, and for example, coaches like Pep Guardiola and Jurgen Klopp, for example, and other such coaches have very publicly spoken about the connections that they have with their athletes. And I know you mentioned that in a setup like team sports, you have a lot of personnel you've got all sorts of, assistant coaches, strength and conditioning coaches, and so on and so forth. But ultimately, the head coach is the coach that is overseeing everyone and everything. So I would probably put the onus on head coaches to take examples like the coaches I mentioned, and many other coaches out there. I can mention other names as well that I really follow and I look up to, because I think they're exemplar in the way they coach and the way they use the relationship to leverage. But yes, I would probably say that team coaches, they can really pay attention to how they relate with each one athlete. And I know it will probably be, as you alluded, it will require much more effort, energy to create those connections. But at the end of the day, it will be truly rewarding, truly fulfilling for the athlete, for their team, and themselves, I believe.
Well, I think you're right. With people like Guardiola and Klopp, it's not even a hidden secret. It's completely obvious when the end of a game happens, almost win, lose or draw. They're walking onto the field, and I always, just thinking about it, I think of the coaches that are connected the best to their players. Are they giving them a hug or a handshake? It's you see that Klopp and Guardiola are hugging their players. They're patting them. They're like their sons. They look like they are part of the family. And you think of other coaches that you would perceive as a little bit more standoffish, and I'm not going to put sort of a real label on it, but you might interpret it as being a little bit more transactional in the leadership style. It's quite literally handshake, well done, great game. Whereas these guys are so passionate. It's really a much more transformational leadership style of coaching. Kind of on that subject, whether you found this in your research or not, or this is purely your opinion, how much does culture of the coach and the athlete play in that relationship? And I think of this especially when not only with Guardiola and Klopp being not from England, but I think of like US and UK culture styles in coaching. Yeah, where has culture played a role in that relationship?
Yeah, good point. So we've done a lot of cross-cultural research. I'm very interested in that particular facet. And interestingly enough, we haven't found cross-cultural differences as such. So we have looked at countries like Belgium and Spain and China. A lot of Scandinavian countries as well have participated in our studies. Greece, of course, coming from Greece, they have been part of it. We cannot find any major characteristics that may differentiate how coaches, athletes perceive the relationship or the significance and the role that the relationship play. And the reason perhaps that we have argued is that the coach-athlete relationship is a characteristic of good coaching. And good coaching is a universal, when you do business, for example, you've got certain things that are universal. And for me, coaching, if it is going to be done well, will require coaches and athletes, regardless of their, place of origin, to secure that connection with the athlete. Now, you may say, well, maybe China perhaps can be a little bit different from the point of view that there is that hierarchy that exists. But what we have found out that actually there is a great deal of respect, there is a great deal of trust, there is a great deal of commitment and cooperation. So the relationship characteristics are all there, and they don't discriminate against culture or team sport or team versus individual sport. I think good coaches, regardless of where they come from, appreciate that, and they are able to apply it accordingly. Of course, there will be coaches in whether it is China or UK or USA, whereby they will coach very much command and control, very hierarchical, patriarchal, whatever you want to call it. but that nowadays doesn't seem to work very well. And what we feel may be happening, and maybe useful to highlight here, is that through a good quality relationship, coaches can manage hierarchies, and because hierarchies can be a barrier in the way that the coach and the athlete operate, I believe. And good, clever, smart, emotionally intelligent coaches, I think, appreciate that the relationship is a good way of managing the hierarchies that inevitably exist. As I said, coaches and athletes have specific roles to play. But meeting the athlete at the level they are, I think it is very good for performance and well-being. And good coaches perhaps get that.
The thing I was thinking about here is, especially in the more towards the US, I think the US, when you were talking about, again, some pushback you had on coaches talking about they don't have to like me to like me, essentially, to think I'm a good coach.
Yeah.
And I think if you look at some old former or long-term coaches in, say, American football or college football in America, they are that more handshake over hug relationship. There's a barrier, there's a drawn line between this is where the coach lies, this is where the athlete lies. But the athletes love it. Like you hear about, I love my coach for the values he's instilling me, and it's a much more, it's not a hierarchical, maybe it is a hierarchical relationship, but it just seems a much more stern, stoic form of a relationship, but it's embraced in that culture. Now, I think of in the UK, I don't know how much that would, I think it would be accepted in parts. I just don't think it would be accepted in lots of parts. We tend to want to have this much more, I want to like someone and enjoy their company and feel like they're maybe a bit more friendly. And that, again, is maybe this British culture that we have as a part of it. I'd say the same in Australia. Like, people want to have that sort of friendly attitude, happy-go-lucky sort of attitude. But I'm then thinking, where does generations start to play a role as we start to move towards a more Gen Z orientated world? Mm-hmm. And there's no secret that is a generation that puts well-being at the forefront of their thoughts.
Yeah. For
better or for worse, sometimes. There's a big debate you could have on that. Where do you sort of see the coach-athlete relationship moving as this generation starts to be the athletes that we're coaching?
Yeah, okay. Before I get to that, remind me if I get lost, but there is an area there that coaches, sport organizations need to reflect on around the subculture of the sport, because you mentioned American football, I think, earlier, and there is a particular subculture that is being created now. Interestingly enough, if we're talking about what effective coaching looks like, and if a part of that effective coaching, the coach-athlete relationship, has an important, significant role to play, I will say that the subculture that exists, and it is as you described, it's not potentially the best one, and it has been perpetuated over the years, and that's how we do it here, and so on and so forth. But is it best for everybody? I will question that. And that brings us back to also, and we may come back to that a little later, on coach education and coach training and coaching skills. Often, our coaches, or some coaches certainly, if they found themselves in a particular subculture, they're going to coach like they were coached. And that goes back again to perpetuating of certain values and certain norms that are not particularly the most effective as we move into the 21st century and beyond it. And talking about now the generational issues, yes, it is very true that we are bringing our children very differently. We want them to have voice. We want them to be engaged. We want them to interact. We want them to be leaders for themselves, and to have an opinion. And why not, at the end of the day? So coaches will have to deal with with that way of expression, which is, I think, a very healthy way of doing things, working together. And they will also have to, kind of come to terms with the technology that our young people engage with, and it's very prominent in their lives. But I think where we are going with coaching and putting the spotlight on the relationship is very healthy, because we allow the coach and the athlete to work together. And what I would like effectively to see is an environment where both the coach and the athlete make contributions. It is very much give and take. As we said, the coach showing genuine interest in the athlete, and the athlete is able to reciprocate as well. And that would be a much healthier place for both the coach and the athlete, and for our sport, given that we want to see winning well, and we want to see a much healthier nation. Because I don't know if you saw today the Sport England announced the results of a survey they ran on active lives, children and young people, and they indicated that 7 million people are active. Actually, 7 million young people are active. They are doing some sort of physical activity in sport, which is wonderful to see, right? But there are other individuals that many young people that not participate in sport at all. And so what Sport England is set out to do now through uniting the movement strategy is to eliminate barriers and get more people involved in sport. Now, my point is, whilst we get more people engaged in sport and physical activity, which is great, across actually the age range, we need to have more coaches or people who deliver coaching that are having the skills and resources to do a good job to enhance the experience, so that we can see lifelong participation in sport that is rewarding and fulfilling. And without having those skills, I don't think we will ever get there. But what is a little bit worrying for me, Luis, is that whilst we are talking a lot about young people and participation and even performance, of course, let's not forget that, we talk a little bit less about coaches and their skills and their training and their education. We need many more coaches. We don't have enough. And we need coaches who are, skilled to pursue it in an accountable and responsible way. So I want really the spotlight to be on coaches, if we can, or people who deliver coaching and training.
I'm booking in a conversation with Richard Cheetham, who is MBE, and he's a coach educator in cycling. Have you come across Richard before?
Yes. I met him once or twice.
I'm really keen to talk to him about this idea of coach education, and not only the technical and tactical concepts or frameworks that are taught within a coaching education. And actually, this stems from going through my master's in performance psychology, just purely as I'm looking through it and going, why is some form of this not on every coaching manual qualification, not to the extent that you need a master's in it, but some form of understanding of some of this work, which would obviously, why psychologists, mental skill coaches exist, is to provide that resource. But I just think the biggest issue I get from whether it's a psychologist or a mental skills coach that comes on here is that the lack of understanding of the work and the importance of it from a coach's point of view is sometimes where the barriers lie and where the walls come up, is because if you don't understand it, you don't really know its value. So that's a really interesting. But I do quickly want to go back to something you were talking about, the sort of athletes owning their training and things like that, and owning what they're doing. Yeah. Do you think we're potentially moving into a place where coaches are maybe placing too much onus on the athlete to sort of take care of things and be accountable? And are we letting go of coaches actually coaching and being the one that's sort of making the rules and setting things up? And I wonder whether that is a generational thing, a societal thing with a bit of cancel culture that's going on, maybe a bit afraid of making decisions. But yeah, where do you lie with that?
Oh, yes. I've got a thinking that, again, it's informed by the work that we are doing, and we have been doing for such a long time. Yes, I do worry a little bit about things. So I will refer to this because I know you will appreciate that. We started many years ago, even when, the first inception of sport, organized sport, kind of came to being. We had coaches that coach in a certain way, and we call it very often, very quick description, as a command and control. They had this sort of, you do as I'm told, and we did that for a long time. As I said, I was one that one of my coaches was very much like that. And then now what we see is that the pendulum has swung all the way to the other side, where now, the responsibility, the onus, as you said, is on athletes. So, and I wonder whether we try to overcompensate, it tried to move away from what we thought it was not working very well or was not fit for purpose, today, to going completely on the other side, which I feel that, I think you alluded, it's not as effective and as productive and useful. And it won't certainly fit, talking about diversity and inclusion, it won't certainly fit a lot of our athletes. Some of our athletes might be happy to get on with such an approach, but many athletes won't be able even to approach their development in that way. And as you said, by doing that, we undervalue and undermine the role of the coach. Where is the coach, in this, what we call athlete-centered approach? What is the coach, and what role exactly does he or she play? So I wanted to redress that, that situation that we have now. And I have proposed a combined approach of coach-athlete, a combined coach-athlete approach to coaching, just kind of to reunite a little bit the command and control on one hand, the athlete-centered approach to coaching on the other, and say, look, good coaching is somewhere in the middle, where both the coach and the athlete work together. And there will be some times that the coach will have to take the command. Some other times the athlete will take the command, but essentially, most of the times, the athlete and the coach will work together, and these joint contributions and this give and take and the reciprocation is at the heart of the athlete's development and well-being as well, and coaches, feeling rewarded and fulfilled by being part of that process. Yes, and this is where I am, I think, and I don't know, Luis, if I did answer your question, but I don't particularly see this athlete-centered approach. And when I talk to coaches, actually, about athlete-centered approach, and then I kind of describe the combined coach-athlete-centered approach, they say, I thought that the athlete-centered approach is very much the combined thing that you are describing now. So,
interesting.
So, yeah, this is what I think anyway.
Look, I've had coaches that have said, look, take account of your careers. It's your career. So and you hear them say, we'll facilitate what you want. And part of me thinks, well, that might be a little bit of a cop-out, because it might be a coach that's just saying, well, if the results don't go the way, then it's right. The athletes ran the show, sort of thing. So it's not my doing. But I think, again, this is also level dependent. I think this is ability, the level of sport that we're at. Well, I wouldn't be talking about recreational park football, for example, here, or young junior level park football. I'd be talking about more professional settings. I think there is a level where the coach has to go, well, I do, to most of my degree, know that I know best, and also I know that you know best for what you want. Therefore, we need to work together. If I was to only give you what I think is best for you, that's not the right way. If you were to only give what you think is best for you, that's potentially not your way, because athletes are human beings. I've seen many professional athletes that will take the easy road, and that doesn't necessarily create performance, development, growth, and then at the end of that, well-being, because you haven't got the best out of yourself.
No.
So I think being able to blend both of those perspectives, both of those views, experience, knowledge, everything is paramount. It's how you do that is very individual to the person. But I think we are at a risk of saying, okay, I need to be so focused on the athlete, on what they want, that I'm actually taking away what I think is best. And I won't go into the parents topic too much, but I think parents, especially when they're, again, if we're talking, say, junior level sport here, I think they do need to have a realization that when you're handing your child over to a coach, you have to trust that there's going to be conflict, it's going to be ugly, it's going to be messy, you might not agree with what they're going to do, but very rarely, as long as it's done in the right way, there's going to be positive benefits that come out of it. When I was living in Australia, and looking after an entire junior section of 80 to 120 kids. I remember the first day that I started with this group was I brought all the parents in. The first training session, we didn't even do any cricket, we didn't do anything, but I just brought them in and had them for a meeting, and I said, right, these are the values that I behold. What are the values you would like to create as a group? And we created them. You're going to hold these as your own. I'm going to own those values with you, but also we're going to set some rules, and I wanted the parents in the room to hear those rules so that if there were any issues, any like arguments that might come up, we could address them. But to say, like, does anyone think any of this is going to be bad? If I set these rules and your child turns up late to training and I send them for laps and the team have to do laps with them and things like that, do you think that's bad? And they go, no, it's fine. But it was opening that sort of door and conversation so that they knew, okay, I'm taking control, but at the same time, I want to know what you want. How would you run it? And I sort of passed reading your research. I was like, okay, that seems like a bit of a middle ground that I found there. But I have seen, obviously, the other end of that could have been me saying, right, you will turn up at this time, you will do this, this is what you're going to do, like it or lump it, we're done. Or you go the other way, you go, tell me what you want, I'll do everything you want me to do. And I don't think either of those are the right. So yeah, that was a bit more of a practical way in which I started to try to accommodate that athlete coach centered approach, and I think it is the way forward.
And also, what reminds me when you were saying is this phrase that often is being used, that again, I mean, I don't know how you feel and how your listeners might think, but for me, when coaches themselves say, I want to be redundant in the life of my athlete, I'm thinking, well, I'm not quite sure what you mean exactly. So, and it goes clearly against what I see as a through the research that we are doing as effective coaching. To make redundant yourself, what exactly does it mean? It doesn't really work like that. How many Olympic level athletes do we see, or Paralympic athletes that are on their own? That not only they've got a coach, but also they have, a bunch of other people helping them to achieve their performances. So, we need to kind of reconsider and reflect the narratives that we create around effective coaching, and clearly the importance of the relationship between the coach and the athlete. And just to follow up this with something that might resonate with what you said, that I see coaching as knowledge dependent. And what I mean by that is that, as you alluded, the coaches don't have all the knowledge, and their athletes, whatever their age, maybe 10, 11, 20, 30, 40-year-old, their athletes might be, they've got a lot of knowledge. They hold a lot of knowledge that can be critical to what they together trying to achieve. So if coaches don't tap into their athletes' knowledge, experience, and so on, they will miss important pieces of the performance puzzle. And it's crazy. But of course, Luis, to get to the an athlete opening up and offering knowledge and offering their thoughts, their opinions, their values, their feedback to their coach, we need to create what I call a psychologically safe environment where they feel comfortable to speak up without fear. The word fear is very important. You know, how many coaches actually ask themselves, do my athletes feel fearless in the environment I have created, or fearful? And how do I know? So, you know, it is important. And then that brings us, again, one last little golden nugget there for you, to the idea that, you know, for me, coaching, whilst coach-athlete relationship is very important, is not just that. There is a golden triangle that I have come to realize through the work that we are doing. Leadership, coach leadership, hugely important. And of course, you know, coaches need to develop leadership skills, which is very different from relationship skills, which is very different from communication skills. So this is the golden triangle of competent coaching. You know, leadership, relationship, and communication are do overlap, but they're very different. And our coaches, if they want to do a good job, a satisfying job, they need to develop in all these three areas.
That fear is a really interesting point, because you hear people who played under Sir Alex Ferguson, for example. Sir Alex Ferguson's regarded as one of the greatest managers in football. And you would hear David Beckham, Gary Neville, Paul Scholes, guys that were playing under him in his most dominant era. They would talk about how they had fear in them of that. But I wonder where that fear is coming from. It's what they're fearful of, right? It's
correct. Yeah.
Is it fearful of the repercussions of the rules at which that coach has set? I would argue that's perfectly fine. And I think of good coaches that I had, and I've actually voiced this before, is that when I went into a junior setup and an academy setup, when I was trying to make it as a pro, the environments I went into, fear was quite a big driver. Now, there's almost a bell curve there where that fear tips over and it becomes very detrimental to what you do. You don't want to make a mistake. You don't even want to try something out of fear of what it might mean. But I think some level of fear engages you and enough to go, there's something on the line here. Whereas I think if you were completely fearless and there was no fear, that might disengage you. Again, we're probably talking complete differences in personality here.
Well, in terms of the fear, we've got to appreciate what exactly do we mean about fear. Fear in the context I'm using it is that I can take interpersonal risk. I can ask my coach, you know, or I can tell my coach I'm injured. I really hurt, you know. And that is the element of lacking fear will be very helpful for the athlete to actually be vulnerable and say, you know, what they feel and think. Having fear about the expectations are high, and we are all accountable. You know, we really need to put training. You know, that type of fear, it's something different. And I will not call it fear. I will call it, you know, we are in a challenging environment. In an environment where we really we have high standards, high expectations, and that gives us a little bit of something to think about. But it's not, it's not the fear that I'm referring to, which is, taking interpersonal risk. It is connected to, can I take actually interpersonal risk? Can I ask my coach? Is my coach actually, going to give me critical feedback and I will, accept it? This is the environment of safety that I'm referring, the psychological safety that I'm referring to. And I would like athletes to feel that the standards are high and there's a lot of expectation there, and to be up for it. And if you call it fear, fine, but I refer to something very different here, I think.
Yeah, I think judgment plays a big role in that. I think I've seen many environments where athletes fear the judgment that the coaches, sometimes even their peers, will say put onto them, and that stifles them from making a decision or asking a question. So I think judgment definitely plays a huge role. And I think I'm really attuned to it now. When I walk into an environment, I am very conscious of the phrasing and the language that they're using. And I'm very grateful for my mindfulness training in that to be able to think about that in any way. But you see so many coaches that will use maybe throwaway comments that you don't realize are just slow paper cuts towards someone's fear of eventually asking a question that could be seminal to their development, and they are never asking that, and then later down the line getting to a breaking point where they don't have the answer that could have been drawn out later down the line. So yeah, judgment from coaches, I'm just a huge no for me. Get rid of that. And I think that's it.
But you cannot take away judgment. You cannot take away humiliation, embarrassment, unless you create an environment where our athletes feel safe to speak up. And you know what, if we could, I wonder whether coaches are fearful of creating an environment like that, because then they will have to deal with a lot, having athletes coming with all sorts of ideas and all sorts of opinions. But that is okay, because the coach, as I said earlier, is a leader, sets the tone, is the wiser, the older and wiser, perhaps not always, but, he can actually, in a tutorial, educational way, if something comes their way, because they have created that fantastic environment of speaking up and voicing one's thoughts, they can actually say, you know what, this idea is great. I never thought about it. Or this idea, it doesn't fit with our culture, our values, where we are going, and so on. So they can push back, but in a way that the athlete will know and understand, okay, I spoke up, so I'm happy, and now I've got my answer as well, which I'm happy as well. But we need to develop coaches so that they can manage that sort of responsibility, I guess.
Yeah, I will actually add into that when I talk about judgment, I'm talking about judgment of the human being rather than potentially the outcomes. I think you need to be judged on outcomes in sport. You just can't get away from it. So we're not ripping away the performance element there. So if there's any coach that's screaming at the listening to this podcast going, well, they need to be judged, otherwise we're never going to know how good they are. I get it, but it's about judging the human being and making sure you're not putting that judgment on, well, I think you're less for raising this issue, this idea. It's encouraging them to be themselves and not stripping away the standards that you potentially set. I want to dive into co-orientation and perspectives and meta perspectives, because this for me was something that I don't want to say could be one of the big culprits of breakdowns in relationships, but potentially one of the culprits of through lack of communication. So do you mind sort of unearthing a little bit more around co-orientation, the perspectives that athletes and coaches might have?
Yes, co-orientation therefore is the essentially very, very simply is the shared knowledge and understanding that coaches, a given coach-athlete dyadic relationship have. And, if a coach has got 20 athletes, he will have, 20 different co-orientations taking place there. And as I said, some will be, quite broad because they have been developed through communication, so through interaction, through experience, and others will be a little bit less because of the lack of interaction, the lack of communication, and so on. And these are very, very important for both performance and well-being. And actually, the notion of co-orientation, it does coincide very much with another concept that we have just started investigating that relates to shared mental models that you may be aware, which is, what we know and what we don't know. And that is important as well, isn't it, really? Because it kind of regulates the ways that we interact, in the ways that we collaborate and the ways that we behave. If we don't have knowledge about what I like, what I dislike, what are my ambitions, what my goals. So how how the training unfolds over a period of time. That will destabilize the way that we work together, or we won't work together as effectively as we can. This is essentially co-orientation, and dare I should say the truth here, because we are honest and open. Co-orientation is probably the one construct that we have not researched as deeply as we could. So as I said, we are trying to make some connections with shared mental models as we speak. So we are working on that in order to further our understanding in terms of what are the important areas where coaches need to come together and have this level of certain understanding, apart from knowing where our relationship is, because co-orientation really captures, the level of common understanding we have about our relationship quality, whether it is good or not so good, or discrepant from the ways that we understand it. So I don't know if I have given you the answer. Probably not, but that's
well. It was looking at perspectives that I found really interesting, because the perspectives of assuming what someone thinks about you, or them assuming what you think about them. And I mean, geez, as soon as I looked at that, I was like, this is far beyond coach athlete. This is in romantic relationships. This is in friendships. This is in every relationship you could possibly think of. Am I assuming this person likes me? Do I genuinely know this person likes me? Do they think I like them? And the perspectives was for me, I feel that sometimes can be or I felt there's so much room to be made in that space of understanding each other's perspectives to build relationships. And I'm not discounting closeness, commitment, complementarity, all the other areas. I'm just thinking that this one is almost like that's the gateway that can get so much space and so much ground in building a relationship, in my opinion, through reading it.
Yes. For the benefit of the listeners, I suppose, because you mentioned the direct and the meta perspective. So the direct perspective is about how we view, for example, in the relationship, how I think or feel for one of my athletes, for example. So yes, I like my athlete. This is my direct perspective, with regard to closeness. And then I also have the meta perspective, which is how I think my athlete thinks of me relative to like. So I believe my athlete likes me, and I make these judgments based on previous experiences, previous interactions. Now, it may be that there are times where this direct and meta perspective of one person are very similar. So I like my athlete, and my athlete likes me a lot, in a similar sort of way. But it may be that I like my athlete, but given what I have experienced through his interactions with me, my athlete doesn't like me. So the perspectives can also go the other way. And both our perspectives, both the direct and meta perspective as a collective, shape our relationship. The final product of how we look the relationship can be shaped not just by the direct perspective, but also from the meta perspective. And what our research is showing is that I think about 75% our perspectives align. Which is good. But there is the other bit that we have found that when the coaches and athletes are a little bit different in their points of view, which can create a bit of conflict or misalignment. And if that's the case, then their interactions are not as effective as they could have been.
That 25% that you talk about there, that's potentially not where everyone aligns. Is that possibly is that almost like the straw that could break the camel's back on the relationship? That sounds like quite because it could be such a potent emotion or perspective that person has, that it could completely outweigh. Like human beings, we so focus on the negatives so viscerally that we completely forget about all the good bits and what we do share and value. That are we potentially focusing too much on that 25%?
it is interesting that we have that percentage. And if it was an applied practical sports psychologist, for example, working with an athlete, and I could see, a discrepancy in perception, then I would be interested to know why it's taking place. And you mentioned that, lack of communication, for example, if you cannot pick up precisely how the other person thinks and feels about you, there is an issue, isn't it there? So is it because, you haven't paid attention in that particular athlete and the ways that they respond to you? What is the disjointed element that we need to fix? Again, I see it as a potential for development and building and progressing the relationship to a better level, because clearly there is something lacking there. But there is also personality issues. That 25%, it might be because, we're very different in the ways that, we relate, attachment styles. I'm thinking insecure individuals versus secure individuals. And then you've got personality orientations. You've got those who are gregarious and open, and those who are introvert and neuroticism. So, and that's why when we talk about relationships and the quality of the relationships, we need to appreciate the context, the wider environment within which the relationship, develops and unfolds. We need to take into consideration the organizational aspects, as we discussed, perhaps the subculture, the culture. We need to take into consideration individual difference characteristics, the gender, the age, the experience, personality. And of course, relationship characteristics. As I said, if you're in a long-term relationship, that relationship will look much different from a newly established relationship. So the context, the contextual factors that surround the coach-athlete relationship quality, we need to be very mindful.
Yeah, I'm very conscious of time, and we haven't spoken about Compass model of sort of maintaining relationships, which I think I've heard you say before as well. It's not necessarily about building them, it's about maintaining them or bringing them out of conflict. And I don't want to go through it every single one, but I thought so for people that are not listening, Compass model stands for conflict management, openness, motivational, preventative, assurance, support, and social networks. For me, the support and social networks was an interesting one, because I think the others sometimes they can explain them for themselves a little bit, but the support networks, I've spoken about this before, about what support looks like from a coach, an athlete, and that I think when we talk about support, many people will talk towards it having to be an arm around the shoulder, caring, loving. Sometimes that could actually be setting standards. It could be holding someone accountable. It could be a little bit more of a tougher support. And I don't know, what have you sort of found there as a part of managing relationships, maintaining them through this model?
There is a whole host of literature around social support.
Yeah.
We need another hour, honestly.
Yeah, true.
That we can refer to. But we're talking about informational support, emotional support, different types of support, when support is given, when support is needed, about the person that gives support, the person that receives the support. There's so many multi factors here that play out, Lewis, and I think you probably need another expert to talk about social support.
I tell you what, maybe if you have the ability, maybe we come back and dive into another area of coach-athlete relationships in the future.
Let's talk about Compass in some detail, about communication strategies and other strategies, because apart from the 7 you mentioned, we can talk about caring, we can talk about compassion, we can talk about empathy. There are many strategies that people can use, our coaches and athletes can use to maintain relationship quality. So yes, we'll put a pin in that for a future episode. Before we wrap this up, one thing I'm curious about is there any direction that you're really curious about in your research at the moment? Something that is sort of setting you on fire that you're
you're really keen to get into in the new year?
There is quite a lot. Actually, I have started 2 projects with a different domain of performance, which is far from sport, but the commonalities are there. And I'm keen to transfer some of our knowledge from performance sport and relationships between coaches and athletes to music and dance and performance arts, in other words. So I'm very keen to transfer some of what we know in different domains. But also, I'm interested to understand the complex dynamics that we have at play, particularly at performance level sport, where the coach and the athlete as a unit relationship have to collaborate and to work together with other scientists, the multidisciplinary teams, I'm thinking, in terms of the physiologist and the psychologist and the nutritionist and the physician, for example, come together when perhaps the athlete is injured. How do we, deal with all these relationships? Who is leading the proceedings? How are they managed? So I'm just quite interested to delve into this social support or the support network that we have in the Compass model.
Yeah, that'll be interesting to find out about. And 2 questions I always ask guests before we leave is there anything that you are currently reading, watching, listening to that's inspiring you at the moment?
Yeah, well, I've got a list of books to read over Christmas. I don't know how many I will be able to do, but I am reading Hidden Potential from Adam Grant at the moment.
Okay.
Hopefully I'll finish before Christmas. And then I would like to get reading Amy Edmondson's The Right Kind of Wrong. Or is it the other way? The Right Kind of Wrong.
I've not heard of this book.
Anyway, it is about failure and how we can reframe failure in a positive way, which I'm very interested to read.
I'm definitely going to add that to my list. I've not heard of that one. And the last thing is, if there's anything that we can challenge people listening to this podcast to take action with from this conversation we've had, what would you place a challenge onto people?
Well, from a coach's point of view, I will say coaches, keep an eye on the coach-athlete relationship. Examine how you relate and communicate with your athletes. What are the connections that you have with your athletes like? And pay attention to those athletes that perhaps you haven't established a strong association for whatever reasons this might be. So just pay attention a little bit to those athletes that have not been, for whatever reason, connected with you. From an athlete's point of view, I will say be aware of the relationships. They're very critical, very important. And I think we need to help our athletes to appreciate the power of relationships. It can really change a lot, I believe. And we need to equip both our coaches and athletes with relationship skills, I think. So I will leave it as that.
Love it. Where's the best place for people to send them to follow what you do, your work, any research you have coming out?
I am on LinkedIn and I'm also on X. So if you want to follow me, please feel free. I do post quite a bit.
Yep. We'll leave all the links in the show notes for that. But from me, Sophia, thank you so much for opening up this research in general and diving into this. But thank you for your time also coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
Thanks very much, Lewis, for the opportunity to speak about the research we are doing here at Loughborough University. And maybe we can speak again.
Yeah, I look forward to it.